And welcome everybody to this webinar. Thank you all for taking the time today to log in and listen and learn about the GSSI Benchmark Tool and its linkage and importance to the Tuna 2020 Traceability Declaration. What I will do today is I'll give a short introduction to the GSSI for those who are not so familiar with who we are and what we do. Then I will go and explain into more detail the benchmark work that we do for seafood certification schemes and how that links to the Tuna Traceability Declaration. And then I'll wrap up with some actions and opportunities for you to engage in our process and help support the work that GTA is doing and the GSSI. As Tom said, there will be plenty of time for questions afterwards, so feel free to pop in the questions in the question box, and I'll look forward to having a discussion after my presentation. So for those who are not that familiar with GSSI, the Global Sustainable Seafood Initiative is a public-private partnership that was set up 7 years ago. And the work that we do really focuses on global collaboration and alignment between commercial businesses, international organizations, NGOs, and governmental organizations. In particular, the UN FAO. We are the only global partnership bringing together businesses and FAO in a formal manner. Through our collaborations with FAO, and industry partners and our partnerships with many NGOs, we're hoping to bring alignment on seafood sustainability issues globally, and thereby also help accelerate the change that needs to take place. The original work of GSSI and our mission has been focused around ensuring confidence in the supply and promotion of certified seafood and promote improvement in seafood certification schemes. The reason for this is that when GSSI was set up about 7 years ago, there was much confusion about the many certification schemes out there globally, and a need for a clarification on which of these certification schemes are robust and credible and can be used in sourcing policies or should be tried to achieve in order to prove sustainability practices in fisheries and aquaculture. To do so, GSSI has brought together a global partnership consisting of funding partners. These are commercial partners from the full seafood value chain, ranging from aquaculture and fisheries producers all the way up to retailers and food service companies. We have affiliated partners, not-for-profit organizations, environmental NGOs, but also governmental institutions like the UN FAO, GIZ, and funders like the Dutch Sustainable Trade Initiative. Today, GSSI is present in over 24 countries, and we're having altogether almost 100 different organizations that are working with us, representing a large part of the global seafood industry. GSSI is a partner-driven initiative. That means that our partners, both funding and affiliators, partners, set our agenda and priorities. We have a joint multi-stakeholder steering board that turns those priorities from our partners into work programs. And when we set up our work, like the benchmark work that I will talk about in a minute, it is the expertise of our partners from industry and NGOs, as well as FAO, that ultimately fuel into the development of those programs. In 2020, the work of GSSI focuses on 3 major pillars of work, one of which I'm going to tell about more in this webinar. We have our global benchmarking work that is aimed at providing clarity in seafood certification programs. This benchmark is focused on environmental criteria and based on the UN FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries and the FAO Eco-Labeling Guidelines for eco-labeling fish and fishery products for marine and inland capture fisheries. Secondly, GSSI is partnering with the Consumer Goods Forum and the Sustainable Supply Chain Initiative. And together, we are developing a social benchmark tool for benchmarking and recognizing credible certification and auditing programs for social labor standards. And we have a technical working group that is currently developing the criteria for at-sea standards. A couple of weeks ago, Thomas van Haan from the CGF gave an educational webinar like this one on that specific work. So I won't spend any time on that this afternoon, but if you do have any questions around that, feel free to reach out or pop them in the question box, and then I can address that in the Q&A. And finally, GSSI has launched a new program this year, the Seafood Map program. Some of you might have been on the launch of that program Monday last week. This program will ultimately also become important for the tuna industry and can support the Tuna Traceability Declaration, but it will be a program that is going to be very much in development over the coming months. And therefore, at this webinar today, I won't spend much time on it. Again, have a look at our website. If you have any questions or want to learn more about the program, please reach out to us separately. So moving forward, why GSSI and the Tuna Traceability Declaration? As you're all aware, the WEF Tuna Declaration has made 4 commitments to help improve sustainability of global tuna sources. The third commitment relates to the commitment of environmentally responsible tuna sources and works towards robust science-based management plans and reduction of bycatch fisheries. And it is in this specific commitment of the Tuna Traceability Declaration that there is a mention and reference to seafood certifications, and specifically certification schemes which are recognized by the GSSI. The reason for this is that it is common understanding that credible certification and the standards that these certification programs try to implement are helping to improve or providing a good evidence that fisheries are managed in a responsible way and can help provide the pathways for improvements that are needed. There are a number of certification schemes out there, which I will come back to in a minute. But it's important that that there are multiple ways that these certifications can operate. And therefore, it was for the Tuna Declaration not possible to refer to one specific certification scheme. And they have opted to reference the GSSI benchmark tool as the threshold for certification schemes that should be recognized under the declaration. This inclusion has been supported by a number of our major certification schemes that have been benchmarked, who wanted to make sure that only those certifications that are really truly committed to delivering change and implementing robust standards could be considered acceptable under the implementation of the Tuna Traceability Declaration. The reason why GSSI was mentioned, and specifically the GSSI benchmark tool, is that the GSSI benchmark tool is grounded in internationally accepted reference documents, mainly those from the UN FAO. And in particular, the FAO eco-labeling guidelines for marine capture fisheries are relevant in this case. The GSSI process took those international guidelines of FAO and through a 3-year multi-stakeholder process, translated that into a framework to assess whether certification programs actually meet those FAO guidelines. That framework includes 4 performance areas, 186 essential components that all schemes need to meet, and 137 supplementary components, which can be used by schemes to show the different approaches that they're taking. That process the framework looks at how schemes operate. So the governance of these programs, how they set their standards, how they make their decisions, how they ensure that they are transparent throughout everything that they do, how they enforce their standards, if there's independent certification, accreditation, and chain of custody, and of course, the content of the standards, which are aligned with the FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. Tom knows a lot about this process as he was part of one of the expert working groups that originally developed these criteria, and he can tell you that they're not easy to meet. Following the launch of the benchmark tool, the GSSI benchmark process started to work. And the way this works is that certification schemes can apply to be benchmarked against the GSSI benchmark framework. And if they successfully complete our benchmark process, they will get a formal recognition by the GSSI steering board as meeting all the components of the FAO eco-labeling. Following recognition, the GSSI will continue to monitor the alignment of the certification programs that it has recognized to make sure that the certification schemes on an ongoing basis are continuing to meet the benchmark criteria. And over time, the GSSI benchmark tool will be revised and continually improve itself. If we look at the GSSI benchmark process, so what a certification program like, for instance, the MSc or GAA, BAP need to do in order to achieve that recognition, it has to go through a 7-step process. The whole process is a voluntary process where the certification programs apply to GSSI to be benchmarked and also pay the fee for the benchmark costs associated with that. The process starts with a desktop review by trained independent experts who are true experts in their field and often have a lot of experience in certification and fisheries science and might also work as qualified auditors for some of the certification programs. They will do a desktop review of how the scheme operates and what it includes in the standard and how that relates to the GSSI essential components. This desktop review is followed by an office visit where our independent experts go to the office of a certification program to really check and verify whether the procedures that a scheme has in place are truly implemented. Once our independent experts are convinced that the scheme is in alignment with all the 186 essential components and all the evidence is documented, that assessment is reviewed by an independent benchmark committee, which consists of trained experts and technical experts from our partnership. The benchmark committee then makes a recommendation for recognition of the program, and that report with recognition gets published for a 30-day public consultation period. Following the public consultation, a final decision on recognition is made by the GSSI steering board. All in all, this benchmark process takes about 6 to 12 months minimum, is our experience, and it has been quite a difficult process for the certification programs to achieve that recognition. It also means that all the certification programs that we have benchmarked had to make improvements to their programs, making sure that this is truly a robust process, ensuring trust and confidence in the certification programs that meet that recognition and can subsequently be used in sourcing policies to help drive more sustainable practices. Today, GSSI has recognized 9 certification schemes across aquaculture and fisheries. Specifically for tuna, there's, I think, 2 schemes that are now most relevant. Of course, the Marine Stewardship Council, and most recently, the Marine Ecolabel Japan, who might certify some of the tuna stocks operating, tuna fisheries operating in Japanese waters. What is interesting about the benchmark tool is that it provides a global framework based on international agreed standards from FAO, but it allows for more local or regional programs to be developed if there is a need for those. So you can have a global acceptability and local applicability of those certifications. And in tuna, as in other species, I think that is an important aspect to consider if we look at how this matters to the Tuna Traceability Declaration. The GSSI Benchmark Tool makes sure that there is a global framework and a common language of what is expected from a certification scheme. And as a trend, we see that there is multiple programs being developed, often with a more specific focus than some of the existing global programs. In fisheries, we've seen the programs focused on Alaska and Iceland, or the Gulf of Mexico. In tuna, there's now discussions by the CEPA, the Ecuadorian trade organization and one of the largest tuna fisheries globally, to develop their own certification program. This could have a major impact on that fisheries and could be an opportunity to help and improve, move those fisheries in the right direction. But in order for that, we need to make sure that the program that they develop meets the international standards. And this is where the GSSI benchmark tool comes in. It can help provide guidance to organizations like CEPA who want to complement the existing programs out there, but need to make sure that they meet the international expectations like outlined in the Tuna Traceability Declaration. And this is something that they are actively looking into and have been communicated about. So again, this gives a pathway to potential certifications that are in development, which should trickle down to the standards and ultimately the policies that need to be put in place to meet that standard. Secondly, the Global Benchmark Tool and Framework provides an opportunity to influence RFMO policies. And a concrete example of that can be found in the letter that the Global Tuna Alliance put down to the WCPFC in January 2020, playing to make sure that the fisheries managed under that RFMO can retain their MSC certification, and for that they need to put in place harvest control rules. This is not something that is demanded by MSC only. This is something that directly comes from the international guidelines of FAO and the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. The GSSI benchmark tool helps to frame these requests and changes to RFMOs within the international context that these organizations operate, relating it back to the codes and conducts that they have signed on to through the partnership they have with FAO. So this really helps to make sure that these issues can be positioned in the global context that they need to be, instead of sometimes being seen as specific issues related to, for instance, a eco-label for market access. Finally, before moving on to some next steps, referring to my earlier slides, the GSSI benchmark tool is not the only benchmark tool that's out there. Within the benchmarking landscape, the GSSI benchmark tool focuses on environmental benchmarking of certification programs in the seafood sector. We are actively partnering with the Consumer Goods Forum and the Sustainable Supply Chain Initiative to develop the benchmark framework for social standards in the seafood sector. But ultimately, that benchmark will be operated by the SSCI. And GSSI, of course, recognizes the benchmark for food safety operated by the Consumer Goods Forum, the GFSI. These three initiatives work together, and the components that we put together for measuring the governance and operational management of these certification programs are very much aligned and look at the same topics. In this way, we also try to make it effective and efficient for certification programs that will operate different scopes under their program. So moving forward, before wrapping up, I'm going to outline a couple of next steps that are coming up for the GSSI benchmark work. So as said, the GSSI benchmark tool development started in 2013 and led to the launch of the tool in October 2015. To date, we have 9 schemes recognized. In the beginning of last year, GSSI started the revision of its global benchmark tool. So we've started the review of our benchmark component and bring in the experience that GSSI has gained over the last 4 years in benchmarking these certification programs, looking at how we can continue to improve and make our benchmark operations more effective, more efficient, and make sure that the robustness and integrity of the program is maintained. That revision process is currently well on its way. Our expert working groups have developed a draft of the new benchmark framework, and we're hoping to finalize that towards the end of this year for a launch of version 2 of the benchmark tool, the beginning of next year. And today marks an important day in that revision process. As GSSI will announce, or actually I'm announcing it here on the webinar, the start of a 60-day public consultation on the draft benchmark framework. So shortly after this webinar, we will put out an announcement, and you can look at our website to look at how the GSSI benchmark framework is going to be updated. And we would like to ask all of you to participate in this public consultation and make sure that the GSSI benchmark criteria remain relevant, and in particular in the context of the WEF Tuna Declaration and the upcoming work that GTA is doing. We'd like to ask you to review if there's any input that you have to improve the GSSI benchmark framework. So with that, I'm going to wrap up my presentation so that we have plenty of time for questions. And I wanted to do that with a slide, what can you do? I would like to ask you to engage in our processes, work with the GTA, but also work with GSSI, provide input in the public consultations and the workshops that we will be organizing. In particular, the consultation on version 2 of our benchmark tool. Secondly, you can help influence change and help implement the Tuna Declaration. And one way to do that is to include GSSI in your sourcing policies, as this will help leverage and strengthen the global leverage to influence change, putting weight to the letters, for instance, that Tom is sending with the GTA, as it shows the relevance and the importance and helps to streamline these requests, for instance, RFMO policy reform. And finally, I would encourage all of you who are not yet part of the GSSI partnership to join our global network so that we can work together on this non-competitive basis and help to continue to progress seafood sustainability, in particular now in the tuna industry. And with that, Tom, I'm going to pass it over to you, and hopefully we have some questions and discussions to wrap up the webinar.
Great, thank you very much, Herman. Fantastic. I'd love to open it up to the audience. If you have any questions or comments for Herman, feel free to shout them out or use the chat function. Whilst people are thinking, I do have a quick question, if that's okay, Herman, myself. You mentioned
Absolutely.
Seafood Map. Is there any chance you could just give us a quick overview of what that is?
Yeah, I can try. So Seafood Map is a program that GSSI will work on to work on the proof of concepts this year. But essentially, GSSI, with our benchmark tool, we focused on providing clarity on certified seafood. Seafood Map is going to provide a pathway for non-certified seafood. It is not going to duplicate efforts that are already in place, but it's if we look at the global numbers, we've seen that at the moment, more than 50 to 60% of global seafood production is not engaged in any of the sustainability programs. And often we don't know how well seafood has been performing. And it is for those markets where certification is not getting traction. And that large portion of global seafood supply where we are not knowing how they're doing. That Seafood Map aims to provide a roadmap of how to bring together and work with the existing initiatives to drive improvements, continuous improvements over time. So Seafood Map will be a very different program than our benchmark tool. It will be a continuous improvement program, but it will help bring together and coordinate and align the efforts that are currently taking place in that non-certified seafood space. Again, bringing together public sectors, government, through our partnership with FAO, the leverage that the market can bring to drive change, and attention to the NGOs that are doing work on the ground, and help position that in a larger framework to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. We've just launched a webpage on Seafood Map through our website, so I would encourage you to have a look into that if you want to have a further dive into that program and see how you can engage in that development process.
Lovely, thank you. Do we have any other questions for Herman at all? No? Well, that's a good sign, Herman.
I hope so.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for joining our webinar, and special thanks to Herman for presenting. If you do have any questions you think about later, or you have any feedback at all, please let me know. I'm happy to share with Herman any questions you email me, and I'm sure Herman will be more than happy to get back to you via me. The next webinar takes place on Thursday, the 9th of April, 4 p.m. UK time, on Traceability in Action, the ISSF Commitments and Verification Tools, and will be presented by Michael Cohen from ISSF or Holly Kohler from ISSF. I think be one of either of them. So, Herman, thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you.